This is Trauma in the 12 Steps, Part 2. I'm your host, Ron Ovitt. Let me ask you, how are you? Did you go over the different types of trauma in Part 1? I hope so. If you didn't, then please go back and do Part 1 before continuing. Now, I know how hard it is to go over alarming details of our life. I know what it's like to get triggered and feel like, If it helps, be your own observer. Be your own client. Try to answer the questions in Part 1 objectively. If you need, go over them with a counselor or someone who can help you process painful emotions. The goal here isn't to trigger you, but to bring into awareness some of the trauma that happened in our life. Today we want to look at emotional pain-based thinking. We usually talk about cognitive learning. It's big in psychology, thinking with our mind. But there is a whole other region of our brain that causes thoughts. That is the limbic, or the emotional part of our brain. The result of trauma is that it can create emotional-based thinking. Some major painful emotions are anger, fear, shame, sadness, and hopelessness. When something is perceived, either in our environment, another person, or our body as dangerous, our amygdala in our emotional part of the brain takes over. We begin to run on adrenaline, becoming non-relational, not able to distinguish people from objects. We can also become non-rational, not open to logic, reason, or persuasion. The left brain of logic is shut down. There are 4 points that I want us to understand about this emotional-based thinking. First, emotions are sensations. It's a deep emotional gut reaction. Emotions are bodily sensations that cause motion, hence the word emotion means to move. Trauma often causes deep emotional reactions when we're going through it. Normally, we think of emotions in terms of feelings. The obvious could be like fear, anger, confusion, sadness, disgust, or hopeless despair. Those are 6 of the major painful feelings. But emotions are the physical reactions in the body that happens to us before we label them as feelings. The purpose is to make us react, move, hence the word emotion. The tightening of the chest, the pressure in the temples, the rapid beat of the heart, the sweat in the palms of our hands. As we consider these, then we label them as feelings. Of course, the word emotion and feelings are used so interchangeably, it would be impossible not to think of emotions and not think of feelings at the same time. But for this study, however, we wanted to make a distinction and consider emotions in their pure form. That is the physical reaction to internal and external sensory input. The second thing is that emotions then help create beliefs and assumptions. When there's an elevated emotion disproportionate to the event, we react. Now later, maybe just seconds or after it's all over, it's followed by some sort of assumptions. We have to think of a rational, why did this happen? Before 12 years old, the emotional brain is in charge. Even though we can do well in school and have our intellect functioning, our rational prefrontal cortex, that part that's rational, doesn't come online till 12 years of age. Instead, we deal emotionally to situations. For example, with shame, we would turn away, drop of the head, a twitch of pain, crying, a freezing. We would not be able to label the reaction, gee, I feel shame. But nevertheless, our reactions would be burned deeply into implicit memories in our body. At around 2 years of age, when a baby starts to learn to ask why over and over again, the baby would start to make childish, immature assumptions of why there is pain. So when someone looks a certain way at us or uses a certain tone of voice, it exhibits some other cues. We wake up to certain assumptions about the situation. As a child, we may think it's unsafe, or I'm going to be abandoned. Here comes pain. They are not happy with me. Or we could have other assumptions about others. I don't trust them. This person is trying to hurt me. Or it could be general assumptions, such as people don't care. I can't trust anyone. If I'm not good enough, people will not like me. Now, it may not be that way right in the childhood, but we learn to think of it this way as we over and over react in the same way. It becomes more verbal, more believed, more complicated, and we start to make these beliefs that move up and that we have later become traits in our life. Finally, as this repeats itself, we start to believe negative thoughts about ourselves. For example, we may think, I am not any good. It's my fault. I'm in danger. I'm unlovable. There's no use of trying. And we grow up with these thoughts into adulthood. The third thing is that emotions turn into feelings. Just as a result of our emotion and the beliefs we attach to them, we can end up with feelings. We usually describe these feelings with a word or two. We find that it can change sometimes quickly to another feeling, so all of a sudden we're sad, and then all of a sudden we become angry. These feelings then create actions, and many times we get implicit memories that stirs up the same feeling that we originally had. Usually way out of proportion, though, to the event that we're experiencing in the moment that we're currently having. That implicit memory brings up something from our childhood and makes us react now in the present in the same way that we reacted back then. We are really reacting to the past pain. This is why we need to ask ourselves, is this emotional response proportionate to the event I'm in? If not, it's probably a reaction from a previous event held in as an implicit memory. So where are these memories of type A, B, or C trauma stored? These traumas are often stored in the subcortical implicit memories. That's a big word. You see, explicit memories are those normal memories that we recall. I had, bacon and eggs for breakfast. Implicit are those hidden from our biographical memory. When trauma occurs, cortisol is pumped into the system, right? Which in turn shuts off the hippocampus, which is in charge of storing our memories. This is why we often don't remember the trauma events. I couldn't remember a lot of my childhood. You may be the same way. During the trauma, our senses still send signals to the different parts of the brain, but the reassembling mechanism of the hippocampus is stymied. However, the amygdala, which is the container of our emotional memory, remembers the senses connected to the event in vivid detail. It will tag all the sensory information with a danger code, so the next time it senses the same thing, it will send out an alarm. Now, why is this important? Because these are not normal memories. They are implicit memories. They are in the background of our awareness. They are part of an autopilot protection system. And the amygdala then will hijack the brain, causing our sympathetic nervous system to go into high alert. It almost seems like we're having an emotional response without any reason, but it is really reacting in the present to something that happened in the past. There are 4 different reactions, right? Run and get away, which is fight, escape. 2, protect ourselves and make the distress stop, fight, right? Flight, fight. 3rd, acquiesce, people please, codependent. I call that fix. And then the 4th is the freeze, shut down until the pain goes away, we collapse. Positive experiences can cause great joy, but painful experiences can cause reactions too. If a caregiver, siblings, or relative was displaying a temper, if there was a yelling or screaming, if there were threats or violence or abandonment, if there was humiliation, the child would become incredibly afraid. If the child was punished severely for something they did not do, it would create fear and confusion. If the punishment was not in proportion to the behavior, there would be fear and anger. How could you trust? This type of negative experiences causes us to relate to similar other people and situations even years later in the same way. Our childhood experiences influence our own image of ourselves. Ever see a beautiful person that is absolutely convinced they're ugly? That's how powerful our early experiences are. It may be a conscious thought, nobody likes me, or an internal negative feeling like gloom and doom. As children, we do not have the capacity to question our caregivers' behavior or assumptions. If they act angrily or extremely punishing or ignore us, it sends a signal that they think we are bad. Worse, the consequences to a child of parental rejection is terrifying. It's a sentence of death to the child. It is hard to minimize the internal fear that a child feels. Actually, they're not capable of really experiencing the full extent of the terror. Instead, they go into a fight, flight, or freeze, or fix, right? Of course, some caregivers make sure you believe that it's your fault by their outbursts and abusive put-downs. Even still, as children, whether or not they did that, it's hard for us to believe that it's a caregiver's fault. We don't have the ability to cast doubt on their judgment. Instead, we internalize their negative view of us and try to project ourselves from anyone else's negativity. Here are a few reactions to the pain from trauma. For a person in trauma, it was being powerless or helpless that created the trauma. So they have many coping mechanisms in place to keep them away from being powerless again. For example, a codependent person or a people pleaser or a perfectionistic is always overcompensating, either helping others, pleasing others, or making sure everything is just right, and yet their own life could be in shambles. They are exhausted, troubled, suffering in interpersonal relationships, physically unhealthy, and the last thing they would want to face is to think that their life was unmanageable or that they were powerless. This is where denial comes from. The truth is, we want to become resilient, to bounce back from triggers, but we are trapped into escaping our emotional pain instead of dealing with it. That's what addictions is all about. Escapes is the overindulgent in excitement, substance, comfort, avoidance, people, emotionalism, or sex. When we have a craving, we long to fulfill it. When we feel anxious, we long to be comforted. We want to regulate these alarming sensations. In other words, we do things to regulate our emotions. If we do not know how to delay gratification or return to a peaceful and joyful place by ourselves, we will try to regulate or bring down the sensations through other ways that comfort or give immediate satisfaction. And trust me, this happens in a second, a millisecond. You see, drugs comfort for a while, but it is not a legitimate comfort. Overeating, gambling, pornography, being emotionally enmeshed with someone, procrastination, there are all sorts of ways to get relief. But these are not comforts that come from legitimate resolutions to a situation or painful emotion. It is just a temporary escape. So we trade acceptance, love, and nurture, things that satisfy, for a quick comfort, things that excite us or calm us. We call these escapes. Escapes happen when the painful emotions become too much that we escape through the overindulgence of excitement, substance, comfort, avoidance, people, emotionalism, sex. Now, in moderation, each one of these has its place, but it is in this overindulgence and dependency on these for relief from painful emotions that causes the trouble. Instead, you and I were created to be resilient and bounce back from these painful emotions. This is returning to love and joy and peace, all the fruit of the Spirit that God desires for us. Deep in our heart, we know something is wrong. We have always had a suspicion. Others have told us that we are broken, but we deeply fear insanity. It is losing who we are, and it is a dreadful fear. Of course, when our life goes, trigger, react, sensation, relapse, reshame, retrigger, it does seem like insanity. Keep trying to fix it in the same way, expecting different results, is the definition of insanity. In this step, we need to let go of our self-reliance. Where has it gotten us? You see, the second step of the 12-step tradition says that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. God wants to deliver us from the struggle we're in. He can do this in different ways. For some, it's an aha, and they are instantly delivered. It all makes sense. For others, and most of us, it's a process. There's an incremental process toward more and more maturity. God can deliver us. So instead of trigger, react, sensation, relapse, reshame, retrigger, we want to maybe get triggered, then pause, give it to God, Ride the wave of sensation. Ask, what am I believing? And then ask God, what's the truth? The truth, Jesus said, will set you free. This is emotional relearning. It's getting to what is behind the trigger. But the truth is, it is hard to break out of a state of mind. Why does a person stand on a corner and live under a viaduct for years? It becomes a state of mind. It is hard to bust out of it. It's their normal. You see, change is risky. I feel safe doing the same thing, even if it's bad for me. This is why in this step, for a person plagued by trauma, we need to let go of toxic loyalty. Whether it is to our dysfunctional family or those we have surrounded ourselves with that do the same thing, we need to break out. The third step to the 12-step tradition says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. You see, it's time to let go and let God. Let Him reparent us. Turn ourselves over to His care. As a codependent, we do for others what we need to do for ourselves. It's time to let God do it for us. You can come to God because He sees you. He hears you. He understands how hard it has been for you. He has always been there with you. He is here now. He can do something about what you are going through. Meanwhile, you have to understand, He's coming to you. He chooses you. This is the God of the Bible. He chooses you. Hear Him say, I see you. I hear you. I understand how hard it has been for you. I have always been there with you. I am here now. I can do something about what you are going through. Look over the 2 steps, the steps 2 and 3 again. Read them, think about them, commit to the God that chooses you. Jesus Christ died on the cross that we could have a personal relationship with God. That can be yours today. God can help you with your emotional-based thinking. Bring your emotions to Him.